Hi, welcome to this video. I'm Wo, mixing mastering engineer. In this video I'm going to show you how I mixed a hip hop track from start to finish. Let's roll the demo. After this amazing intro, I'd like to show you the drums first. Let's listen to them without processing. And now with processing. That's a big difference. Before I go into the details of the elements itself, I'd like to talk about the idea behind this mix. As you can hear, there are very little drums. The 808 is left out because I treat it as an instrument, that one's coming up. It's very sparsely arranged. The very few elements we have, we need to make it sound interesting. How are we going to do this? There are a few ways to make these instruments sound bigger and more interesting. That's EQ, compression, delay and reverb. Now because there are so few drums, it's not wise to use delay here because it would create a whole different vibe and would be more an artistic choice rather than a mixing tool. For today we're just using reverb, EQ and compression. First off, the kick. What did I do to the kick? We have an SSLE channel. In an upcoming video I will show you how to gain stage with the SSLE channel and within FL Studio itself without any third-party software. Second is an API 2500 compressor. Absolutely love the thing. What this compressor is doing, it's adding focus, it's adding character and it's adding punch. Let's toggle it on and off. Without, with. You can hear the kick is more centered, it's more focused, it has more bite, it's more clear. If I turn off the compressor, you hear it's a bit muddy and it's not feeling hip-hop like, it's not feeling trap like. And within the API 2500 I set the threshold, kind of fast attack, 6:1 ratio. I really want to smash this kick in this instance, and a very slow release. And then the real power of the API 2500 is the tone, the knee and the thrust. It's on a loud thrust to give it even more bite, more grit. Let's listen if I put it to normal. Now loud. You can just hear it, it's more gnarly. Last plugin on the kick chain is an Weauxbeats style EQ. Now this one isn't as clear what it does because I adjusted it in the context of the entire mix. It was sounding too bright, so I rolled a bit off, attenuated the high end, and when it's played in context with this EQ, the kick sits way better than without it. Moving on to the snare. Again, an SSLE channel. I set the gain with this knob here, and then I played around with the EQ. And in the EQ I rolled off some high end, boosted some high mids and boosted some low mids around 300 Hz to give it really the punch this snare has. If you turn off the EQ, it sounds like this. Turn on the EQ. The snare sounds a bit muffled but has more punch, and again it is more focused in the center of your stereo image, where in this genre you really want your snare to shine. There was a reason for the cut in the high end. The hi-hat and the snare, they were clashing. It wasn't really clear which element was playing when the snare and the hi-hat played at the same time. They were struggling for attention. And in the mix your goal is to make every element shine, every element sit individually. That's why I cut the high end a bit in this case. And for the hi-hats there are two that are layered together. The main hi-hat I didn't process on the singular channel. The hi-hat support I did adjust on the channel itself. I gave it more high presence to really stand out from that snare, to give a better emphasis on the hi-hat in comparison to the snare. The more interesting part comes on the bass channel. There are three plugins on the bass channel. First, SSLE channel to set the volume and to give a boost to around 1.1 kHz. This is quite unusual because normally hi-hats don't really have any frequencies or energy over there. So in this case, boosting it at this frequency, it just set better in the mix. Especially when combined with the snare itself, you get a more push in this frequency range, which really drove the instruments forward more. The next plugin is an isotope vinyl. It's a vinyl emulator. I gave the hi-hats some warp depth to give some modulation to keep them interesting. Lastly, the third plugin, the Saphira Stereo, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, to give it more grit, to give it more character. Even the preset is called Add Bark, and I adjusted a little bit. Turn it on, it sounds like this. Turn it off. On. Just gives a little bit of depth. It's probably difficult to hear over YouTube, but again, this was done in the context of the mix, and if you solo the elements it might not be as clear as it is within the mix. Then onto the main part, the 808. This one is amazing. This one is very big. You all heard it in the demo. Let's play it loud. Sounds a bit weird without the kick and being sidechained, but you get the gist of it. First things first, setting the gain with an SSL channel. You know the drill by now. No EQ, just the in knob. Next is a BX Control by Brainworks. I use this one for the mono maker knob over here. I set it to 83 Hz at the moment. I had it a bit higher at like 150, 170, what I usually do, but in this case the energy of the kick just disappeared if I put it up that high. So I really want the lows and maybe even the subs, if you want to call it that, up until 83. I want to keep that mono like tight in the center, creating the stereo image. It'll be really tight, and then the rest of it could be flying in a stereo. I don't mind. Then stereo imager, I brought down the stereo image a bit narrower because it was just a bit too much. I know I just said run wild, but too wild wasn't working for this mix. If I turn off all the plugins with, just feel like a little volume boost and just a bit more power. Next part, the flute. When talking about stereo field and the stereo image, this one is interesting. You can hear it just shifting from left to right, and in the center there's a bit of a flute, and I achieved that by first, you know it, SSL channel, setting the gain, no EQ. Second plugin is Lufticus. Lufticus is a Maag style, Maag replicate EQ, and it's brilliant for bringing out the air, as they say in their manual, out. And it's true. It's like if you shift this knob here with a 20 kHz high boost and a bit of 2.5K, it just gets so much more presence. I'll just let you listen. You can just hear the air appearing. It's a brilliant EQ, and it's free, by the way. I'll put the link down in the description. Next plugin is an imager. First with the EQ I gave it some air, and now with the imager after the EQ I'll give the air some more space by just slightly adjusting the width upwards so it's wider than original. You can see in the polar sample how wide it is. And it's not crazy wide, it gets still here and here, but for this track, because it has so few elements and it's so simple, you still want to keep the focus. I put it wide, but still centered wide, if that makes any sense. And then below here, the shaper box, which is the sidechain. Same goes for the 808, the shaper box is the sidechain. Finally, the last instruments element. The Vox, or the vocal one-shots, whatever you want to call it. First up, gain staging, setting the levels as an channel. Second is a reverb on the insert itself, which is also being sent to a reverb send. Very complicated. What this does is take the vocal shots and put them back, way back in the stereo image, in the stereo field, so you get a proximity effect from the drums. They are in your face. Then you get and the 808s also in your face. And then you get a wall of the flute, and then behind that, or on top, left, right of that, is the Vox synth, the one-shots. And I used medium reverb, I'll get to the settings in a minute, on this one, but it just didn't give me enough depth. So I put the reverb on the insert itself, which you should actually never do because it can muddy up your sound, but in this case it worked. The mix is set on 37% because I still want to have the dry signal for a bit and just a tiny bit of reverb, wet signal reverb, to still have it present, but in the back. And I could only do that by combining this reverb with the send reverb. Finally, the mono mod. I use it as an auto panner. In this case I use it quite crazy. It almost goes 360 degrees. This radar-like thing goes from left to right, which makes it stereo. And then I played with the mix knob. So only a part of the signal gets shifted around the stereo image, and that's how I created a very modulated sound in the Vox hits to create an even more interesting stereo field. This was it for the drums and the instruments. Lastly, I'll quickly go over my sends. I use 3 sends, a short one, medium one, a long one. In this case I didn't use the long one, but it's preset. And I used 1 delay, which I only used on the Vox synth to give it more stereo field. This one is the short reverb, so it's set quite short, 0.68 of a second, and I use it just for the drums. Second one is the medium, which is set still quite short, but for this track the short medium one worked, if you're still following me, which is only used on the instruments. Finally, fruity delay to give a bit more of stereo image, more interesting things going on. I set it to ping pong, once again only used on the Vox hits. This was it for mixing the entire hip-hop track from start to finish. I hope you learned something, I hope you liked the content, I sure enjoyed making it. If you want to know more or have a question, please leave them down in the comments. Leave a like, subscribe, you know the deal, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye!